You said that there is no knowledge in the books.
No knowledge, that's right. The only source of knowledge is living human tissues in the brain. What you have in the books are texts which are reminders of knowledge. So, and the trick is to use the text, and we're immensely subtle in doing this. We've created incredibly clever ways over the last 2,500 years of using written material to communicate meaning, that is living knowledge, to somebody else. But what it's going through is not living knowledge, that is a code, and we try to rebuild. So we know that the problem in school is that often it's possible to teach children to replicate the codes. They repeat it in exams, but you never are sure that they've actually learned, that it's not any longer living knowledge for them. And unfortunately in schools we also reward most children who are good at this, what can be a fairly meaningless activity of learning things, repeating them in almost rote-learned ways, and we grade that and we give them advancement and they go on to universities, whereas children who may be slower and learning much more richly do not get rewarded because they are confident only when they understand the meaning of the knowledge in some way.
Yes.
Now, that need not be a simple set of oppositions, but I think if you're unaware of the fact that learning the code is not the same as learning knowledge meaningfully, then you're likely to exaggerate and be satisfied with children being able to learn and repeat codes. So, and that's very much what exams are in schools, they're repeating the codes. So it's a bit of a problem if you don't know the difference. If you don't recognize there's a difference between true knowledge and the codes in which we store it, then you're liable to make all kinds of rather horrible educational errors.
And that drives you, because in the book, The Future of Education, your book,
right.
You said that the difference between a good and a bad student is that the bad forget the subject half an hour before the test, and the bright one forget the subject half an hour after the test.
The successful one, yes, right. Yeah, no, and that we all recognize that kind of thing is crazy, and we all recognize that children, if you think of what you remember of the curriculum you were taught at school, and I sometimes ask kids, students, about what they remember from grade 8 about mathematics and or history, and everybody knows that we will forget a great deal, and nobody bothers very much about that. And you have to say, well, what's the point of doing it? Why, if the knowledge isn't important? Now, a lot of people say, well, education is what's left after the knowledge that you've learned has been forgotten. It's what the skills are. But that's nonsense, because the skills are tied up in the knowledge that you learn. It's not as though these are separate things. So it's important to know a lot, and to know how to deal with that knowledge and how to manipulate it and how to use it for all kinds of beneficial effects.
And actually you cannot speak about knowledge if you cannot have it in your mind and use it whatever you need. So then you have a real knowledge when you have a lot of information in your brain, and then you can relate them and rebuild in different shapes, so use it.
Yes, and so a necessary feature of the whole program is indeed the development of increasing flexibility in the kinds of understanding that we develop. So the theory is made up of sets of cognitive tools. The cognitive tools lead to distinctive kinds of understanding. Each one of these has its own kinds of sophistication, and the trick of getting from one to the other is indeed that not simply starting another one, but going through the series, and then they blend up anyway. So
I understand perfectly the concept of theory, and I know that the curriculum, not just in Chile but worldwide, it's generally speaking a disaster. If you have to think about a perfect curriculum, or not perfect, because nothing would be perfect among human beings, we are not perfect, but a better one, what would you recommend it?
Well,
if you have the power to do, to change the things.
At some level, I don't think it matters too much, in that when you say the curriculum is a disaster, often it's not the curriculum, it's the way it's delivered. You know,
Yeah.
what the problem is the knowledge is all fine. If you look at the curriculum as a great encyclopedia of knowledge, you can say, gosh, there's endless wonders there. But at the same time, you have to, the disaster in some sense, and as far as it is one for many people, is that children don't really become familiar with it. They don't get a sense of the wonder that can make learning really interesting. So that the adventure of becoming familiar with the curriculum is not one that is very common in our system. So it's less the curriculum that bothers me, though one could indeed have a different kind of curriculum.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Thank you.
But it's more, I think, how we conceive it. You know, what we think we're doing, and a lot of people, particularly driven, I'm afraid, I think, by some of the features of educational psychology, that assume that learning is a process that involves or is measured by how much the student can repeat after a certain interval and the efficiency with which you can do that. Not all the time, obviously. But it leads to a very impoverished notion of what learning is. It misses out entirely the necessary emotional components and the imaginative components. So it's fairly easy to get students to do well on testing in various ways. It's just that one also wants them to be able to make meaning out of this in a way that will enhance their lives, enrich their lives. So, and that's not hard, it's just that we think, it seems to me, we think in impoverished ways about the curriculum and what it's about and what we're trying to do in education and how we want to ensure children have life and have it more abundantly, as we might put it.
Yeah, but also, generally speaking, in education, and at least in Chile, they follow all the School of Education and teachers in general, they follow Piaget as a saint of altar, so he is the one with the truth. And whenever you touch Piaget, they look at you like you are an heretic or something like that. I'm really impressed because I do not come from education. I get into education later on, and when I read Piaget for my first time, I thought immediately, this guy is wrong, because he says that human beings are concrete first, and later on abstract. But language is completely abstract.
Yes, somewhat. That's true. Well, I think Piaget was a genius. I mean, and
of course,
quite fascinating. But increasingly, strangely, I mean, in psychology, it's recognized increasingly that many of the features, the bases of his theory, are inadequate, have been shown to not be correct, etc. And one of the strange things about education is that it doesn't seem to bother anybody. Either they don't know about it, or it doesn't matter, because, and then there's a sense in which what has been constant in modern education is what we call progressivism. You know, this notion that somehow, if you match teaching to the development of the child, you'll be more efficient. And progressivism was becoming increasingly less effective, or perceived to be less effective, particularly in North America, by the late 1940s, middle of the last century. And Piaget, I think, came along as a kind of savior, because what Piaget was doing was offering a new conception of how children's intellectual development goes forward. And he himself wrote 2 books, both very progressivist kinds of books about education. So there was a sense in which he was a savior of a kind of education that was increasingly losing its credibility with the population at large. And so everybody started using Piagetian curricula. Now, I mean, the strange thing again is that when there have been large-scale tests of Piagetian curricula against regular schooling, in no case has the Piagetian curriculum and teaching proven better. And you'd think, well, if this is supposed to be modern, scientifically proven, etc., you would look for evidence that it was actually doing better than what is supposed to be the despised traditional modes that it's replacing. But that's not available. That evidence is not there, and the theory itself is under attack in many different dimensions. But it supports the ideology of progressivism. So, and as long as that's in place, nobody cares about facts, theories, ideas. It's just the support. And my friend Howard Gardner, I think, is a more modern replacement for that ideology. He himself is very happy to acknowledge he's a progressivist. He sees that as the best way of educating children, which I must admit I obviously don't agree with, but a lot of people think his notions about multiple intelligences and other things are fantastic. They're giving us the answers, etc. Very hard to know what you do on a Monday morning that's different, that is evidently leads to superior achievements for children as a result of any of the theories. And I think Howard Gardner is a very subtle, sophisticated man who recognizes the problems of implementing multiple intelligences as one of the theories he's developing. So all of those things are, I think, they get immense support because they seem to provide some sustenance for an ideology that has been in danger of proving unsatisfactory in general. And I don't think in the end they will change anything, because I think that they are fundamentally unsatisfactory because they don't allow for all kinds of features of children's development and understanding that are crucial to making meaning in the world. Anyway, and this is a good way to make lots of enemies. But I think imaginative education provides an alternative to all of these, and an alternative to progressivism, and an alternative to traditional modes of education. It's a way of thinking about education that gives much more importance to the ways in which we feel and the ways in which our imaginations work, and seeing the imagination as one of the great drivers of learning and of our intellectual development.
Yeah, and also you can apply the ideas within the system that is already established. So using the curriculum in another, reshaping the lessons in another way.
Yeah. So any teacher close their door, they can teach using imaginative education techniques. All the tests we've had so far suggest that children will learn better, they will learn more, they will remember longer, they will perform better on all the tests. That's none of that matters. Strange, you would think that would be crucial, but it doesn't fit with the dominant ideologies of education.
No, I know.
And as a result, we have difficulty. Now, lots of teachers, more and more teachers in many countries in the world are finding it works, and works for them, and not only improves their children's performance and happiness and engagement, but their own. They find, I'm able to do what I've always wanted to do, and because it makes more sense to them. That's the advertising feature.
Yeah, but it's true, because remember when I visited you the first time in Vancouver, and you asked me what I want to do, and I want to change a thing, and I want to spread a sort of virus.
Ah, yes.
And you laughed because I really believe that when you start doing imaginative education, the other professors or teachers ask you what you do, because first the students evaluate you very high, and so they look at you like, what are you doing?
Yes.
And then it's contagious, isn't it?
Yes. Well, a lot of, in fact, some of the people we work with, as you know, talk about the individual teacher going out as the virus that is going to spread through the system. And we see some of that happening, of course, but who knows? I mean, education systems are such complicated beasts.
I know.
And there's such inertia built into the systems that really changing them in any significant way is very difficult. Progressivism itself was one of the only, it seems to me, major successful changes in education, in educational systems. And it itself now is incredibly resistant to any further change that would replace it in any way. But it's an interesting business to see how one can do that.
Yeah, I think it's not just education, it's human being.
This is true.
It's easy to do the same. This is the way to do it.
Yes, that's right. Oh yeah, we all function like that for a lot of our lives. And particularly if you're a teacher, you've been trained in a particular way.
In a certain way.
You're influenced by the teachers who taught you, and our educational, teacher education programs have a whole series of fixed beliefs, many of which make no sense at all. All the evidence is against them, and yet they persist. The notion that we talked about, moving from the concrete to the abstract, that's assumed that that's a principle that comes out of Herbert Spencer in 1854, and that of course became also a central feature of progressivism. So nearly every teacher I know has been taught that children's minds are concrete. Now, good and bad are not concrete ideas, but children use them very readily and easily all the time. They're the most abstract ideas we ever learn. So by 4 or 5, if you look at the Grimm fairy stories, they're full of these, they're built on these fundamental abstract concepts like good and evil, courage and cowardice, security and fear, etc., etc. And the idea that in the midst of all this people can still believe that children are concrete thinkers and that abstractions don't come into their thinking until they're 15 or something. You think,
and this is the reason why you cannot teach them history, for instance,
Until
they are in 5th grade.
Right, yeah. And so there's a lot of absurdity that manages to survive despite the obvious fallacy that's involved in. And a whole series of principles like that, I think, in education. Children's learning moves from the known to the unknown. Now, at one level, it's a truism, but at any other level, it just doesn't make any sense at all. If you look at what does the 11-year-old most want to know, they want to know who had the longest fingernails ever, or who was the biggest person, the smallest person. That is, they're not moving from their everyday experience outwards. For young children, they're caught up with fantasy worlds, and later children, it's the Guinness Book of Records kind of stuff. And you think, this doesn't fit at all. The most obvious things you observe about children don't fit some of the most commonly taught principles about education to teachers. So how are teachers supposed to then come in and take on imaginative education? Because of course it runs counter to a lot of the things that they have experienced in their own education and then being taught in education programs. Not just taught, but given as the fundamental truth that everybody takes for granted, move from the concrete to the abstract, from the simple to the complex, etc. None of it makes any sense at all if you actually look at human beings. But again, one of my theories is that the people who write educational textbooks are not allowed to meet children, because it hinders their...
They can change the things. They can change the things.
That's a bit cynical, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say such things. But
nah, but it's true. Sometimes you have to say some things hardly, that people realize, because common sense used not to be the most common of the senses.
Indeed.
Indeed.
I think everybody agrees with this.
Yes. So thank you, Kieran, to be with us and to explain about this.
Okay.
And we expected to be in Vancouver in January with a group.
Oh, good.
And I will tell the people, if anybody wants to join us, it would be great. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Vamos a estar con la Red Cultural en Vancouver, con un grupo en la Universidad de Simon Fraser, en un seminario con Kieran Egan, así que cualquier interesado en ir con nosotros por una semana, un seminario intensivo en la Universidad de Simon Fraser con Kieran y todo su equipo, están cordialmente invitados. Solo tienen que contactarme por interno. Muchas gracias.
So I look forward to seeing you in Vancouver too.
Thank you.